I did not know that the end of my marriage would begin with a single phone call that was not meant for me, or that by the time the truth surfaced, everything I believed about my life, my husband, and the family I married into would already be quietly decided without my consent. My name is Sophie, and this is the story of how a 5-year marriage was dismantled behind closed doors long before I was asked to leave it. That evening began like many others. I was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of beef stew, the kind Ethan liked after long workdays, the kind I had learned to cook because pleasing him once felt like love. Outside, rain pressed against the tall windows in slow, heavy sheets, and the house felt unusually still, as if it were holding its breath. Ethan was in the shower upstairs. His phone lay on the kitchen counter, vibrating again and again. I noticed the name on the screen because it was unfamiliar. Clara, I told myself it was nothing. In 5 years of marriage, I had learned not to question, not to probe, not to disrupt the calm that kept this household functioning. The phone rang a third time. From upstairs, Ethan called out, slightly irritated, asking me to answer it. I picked it up without thinking, expecting a colleague or a business contact. Before I could speak, a woman's voice came through, tight and shaking, calling Ethan by a name she clearly had every right to use. She said she was scared. She said she needed him. I did not hear the rest, because Ethan rushed into the kitchen, still damp from the shower, and took the phone from my hand with a speed that felt instinctive. He turned his back to me and spoke softly, using a tone I had not heard in a long time. The spoon slipped from my fingers and hit the floor. The sound was sharp, final, and out of place. Ethan did not turn around. In that moment, I understood something without needing proof or explanation. The space between us had already been crossed, and I was the last to know. After that night, nothing openly changed, but everything shifted. His parents stopped calling. Invitations disappeared. Family dinners ended without discussion. When I visited the estate weeks later for a routine gathering, I was treated like someone whose presence was temporary. Ethan still came home, still slept under the same roof, but his attention belonged elsewhere. Sometimes his clothes carried a scent that was not mine. Sometimes he left without explanation. I did not confront him. I waited because waiting had always been my role. I believed that patience could repair things, that silence could protect dignity. What I did not yet understand was that decisions were already being made, meetings were already being held, and I was no longer part of the conversation. The confirmation did not come from Ethan. It came from the silence around me. His mother, who used to call every week, stopped entirely. Messages went unread. Plans were canceled without explanation. When I tried to ask Ethan if something was wrong, he brushed it aside, saying his parents were busy and under stress. His answers were smooth, practiced, and empty. I began to understand that whatever was happening did not include me by design. Then the rumors started reaching me from the outside. A friend sent a message asking if I was feeling well. Another asked if I had seen the news. I avoided opening the links they sent because I already knew what I would find. The truth has a way of pressing against your chest even before you see it written down. One morning, an unfamiliar number appeared on my phone. When I answered, I recognized my mother-in-law's voice immediately. It was calm, controlled, and distant, stripped of any warmth it once carried. She told me to come to the family estate that afternoon at a specific time. There was no greeting, no explanation, only instruction. When I called her Mom out of habit, she corrected me sharply and ended the call. The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there for a long time holding my phone, realizing that this was not a conversation but a summons. Whatever decision was waiting for me had already been prepared. I was being called to hear it, not to influence it. Before I left the house, my closest friend called. Her voice was strained as she told me the photos were everywhere. Ethan had been seen escorting another woman into a medical clinic. The article described the woman as pregnant. Twins. The word lodged in my mind like a foreign object. I opened the link she sent. There was Ethan, his hand steady on another woman's arm, his attention entirely focused on her. He looked present in a way he had not been with me for months. I did not cry. I felt something colder than pain. The realization that while I was still trying to save my marriage, it had already been publicly replaced. At the estate, I was led into a quiet room where Ethan's parents were waiting. Papers were neatly arranged on the table between them. No one asked how I was. No one mentioned Ethan by name. His father spoke first, stating facts as if reading a report. The woman was pregnant. The family needed heirs. The situation had to be resolved cleanly. Then his mother slid the papers toward me: divorce documents, a compensation offer, conditions, silence clauses, a deadline, and finally a requirement that I leave the country after signing. They spoke of it as a practical solution, something reasonable, something considerate. I listened without interrupting, because interrupting would not change anything. When they finished, I understood the full scope of what had been done. My marriage was not ending because of betrayal alone. It was ending because I was no longer useful. I did not sign the papers that day. I asked for time, and after a brief exchange between Ethan's parents, they agreed to give me 3 days. Not out of kindness, but because they were confident the outcome would be the same. When I left the estate, I understood clearly that this was not a negotiation. It was a countdown. Ethan was already home when I returned. He watched me closely, as if measuring how much I knew. I told him where I had been. He did not pretend surprise. He only asked what his parents had said, his voice carefully neutral. When I told him about the divorce offer and the money, he was silent. That silence answered more than words ever could. I asked him what he wanted. He said he did not want things to become complicated. He said his parents were under pressure. He said the other woman was pregnant and frightened. He did not say he loved me. He did not say he would stop this. He spoke as if events were happening to him, not because of him. That night, he slept in the living room. I lay awake, listening to the quiet of the house, realizing that this separation had already begun long before either of us admitted it. The next morning, messages flooded in from people I barely knew. Some expressed sympathy. Others offered advice I did not ask for. A few were openly cruel. They spoke as if my worth had been measured and found lacking. I did not respond to any of them. On the second day, I went to a private clinic. I told myself it was because of exhaustion and stress. I had been dizzy, nauseous, unable to eat properly. The doctor asked routine questions and ordered tests. I sat in the waiting room surrounded by women who were not alone. When my name was called, I expected nothing. The doctor looked at the results twice before speaking. She told me I was pregnant. 6 weeks. The words did not register immediately. I asked her to repeat it. She did. I walked out of the room holding a piece of paper that changed everything. I sat alone in the hallway, counting backward in my head. The timing was undeniable. This child existed before the photos, before the public exposure, before Ethan stopped coming home early. The life growing inside me belonged to a marriage that was already being erased. I did not tell Ethan. I did not tell his parents. I did not tell anyone who could turn this into leverage. I told only my friend, who stared at me in disbelief before pulling me into a tight embrace. Her first words were not congratulations. They were a warning. She told me that if Ethan's family found out, they would not let this go. That evening, Ethan reminded me that the deadline was approaching. His voice carried relief when I told him I understood. I watched his face carefully and saw no hesitation, no conflict. In that moment, I realized that if I stayed, this child would never be mine alone. That night, I made a decision I had never imagined making. It was not driven by anger or revenge. It was driven by fear, clarity, and the understanding that whatever I chose next would decide not just my future, but my child's. On the third morning, I woke up before dawn. Ethan was still asleep in the living room. I stood alone in the kitchen, holding the pregnancy report in my hand, reading the same lines again and again as if they might disappear if I looked away. 6 weeks pregnant. The timing was cruelly precise. This child existed before the betrayal became public, before the divorce papers were printed, before my place in that family was erased. I folded the report carefully and hid it deep inside my bag. From that moment, I understood one thing very clearly. If Ethan's family learned the truth now, the offer would change, the tone would soften, and the pressure would multiply. They would not come to protect me. They would come to claim what they believed belonged to them. Ethan woke up late that morning. He asked if I had thought about the agreement. I told him I had. He nodded, as if relieved that the waiting would soon be over. He did not ask how I felt. He did not ask if I was afraid. He simply reminded me that his parents were expecting an answer by evening. I left the house alone and went back to the estate. This time, the papers were already laid out and the lawyer was present. No one asked if I needed more time. They assumed my silence meant consent. His mother explained the terms again, slower this time, emphasizing the money, the confidentiality, the requirement to leave the country. She spoke as if she were offering me a favor, a clean exit. I asked one question: what would happen if I refused? His father answered calmly, explaining that legal action would follow, that my reputation would not survive it, and that I would leave with nothing. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. I looked at the signature line for a long time. I thought about the child growing inside me, unseen and unknown. I thought about how quickly that child could become a bargaining chip, a reason to control me for the rest of my life. I understood then that staying would not protect me. It would only bind me tighter. I signed. The pen did not shake in my hand. When I pushed the papers back across the table, his mother nodded once, satisfied. The lawyer collected the documents immediately. The conversation ended there. No one thanked me, no one apologized. The transaction was complete. When I got home, Ethan was waiting. I handed him the copy of the agreement. He read it quickly, then let out a breath I had not realized he was holding. He said thank you. That word stayed with me longer than anything else he had said in years. That night I packed quietly. I did not take much. I left behind things that no longer mattered. Before sleeping, I placed my hand on my stomach and made myself a promise. No one would ever use this child against me. The next morning, I left the country with a signed divorce and a secret that would change everything. I did not tell anyone I was leaving until the night before my flight. Ethan already knew the arrangements because his parents had handled everything. The money had been transferred, the documents finalized, and my departure date fixed. It all moved quickly, as if they were afraid I might change my mind if given space to breathe. Ethan did not try to stop me. He stood in the doorway while I packed, watching in silence, like someone observing a process that no longer concerned him. At the airport, my friend came with me. She hugged me tightly and asked again if I was sure. I told her I was. I did not tell her how afraid I was or how heavy the secret inside me felt. When I passed through security, I did not look back. I knew if I did, I would hesitate, and hesitation was something I could no longer afford. On the plane, I sat still for a long time, staring straight ahead. The divorce papers were done. My marriage was officially over. On paper, I was free. In reality, I had never felt more exposed. The pregnancy report stayed hidden in my bag, folded so many times the paper was soft. Every small movement in my body made me alert. I was no longer just protecting myself. I arrived in a country where no one knew my name, my past, or my connection to Ethan's family. That anonymity felt like safety. I rented a small apartment and kept my life narrow and quiet. I avoided unnecessary contact. I followed the doctor's instructions carefully. Each day, I counted weeks instead of days, measuring time by something growing silently inside me. The first sign of trouble came sooner than I expected. My phone rang late one evening. It was an unfamiliar international number. I did not answer. Minutes later, a message appeared. It was brief, polite, and unmistakably formal. It said they hoped I had arrived safely and that they would like to discuss something important. They had found me. I did not respond. The next day, another message arrived, this time from Ethan. He asked how I was doing. He asked if I was settling in. The questions felt rehearsed. I replied with one sentence, telling him I was fine, nothing more. A week later, my friend called, her voice tense. She told me that Ethan's parents were no longer calm. Something had changed. She did not know how, but she was certain they were searching for information they did not have before. I thanked her and ended the call quickly. That night I lay awake, my hand resting on my stomach, thinking through every possibility. If they knew, they would come. If they came, they would not ask. They would demand. I understood then that disappearing was never going to be enough. Whatever I was carrying inside me was not just a secret anymore. It was a threat to people who believed they owned everything they touched. I kept my routines simple and predictable. Work, clinic visits, home. No social posts. No shared location. No photographs. I did not want anything that could be traced or interpreted. For a while, the messages stopped, and I allowed myself to believe that distance had done its job. Then the call came from a number I recognized immediately. Ethan did not waste time with small talk. He told me his parents had questions. He said they wanted to clear misunderstandings. He said they were worried about me. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I asked him directly what had changed. He was silent for a moment too long. I told him there was nothing to discuss. I reminded him that the agreement was signed, the marriage ended, and the terms were clear. He said he understood, but his voice carried uncertainty. Before hanging up, he asked one last question. He asked if I was hiding anything from him. I told him no, it was not a lie, I was not hiding, I was protecting. 2 days later, I received an email from a law firm I had never contacted. It was written carefully, avoiding accusations, requesting confirmation of my current circumstances. They claimed it was routine. I knew better. Routine did not cross borders. I went to a lawyer recommended by my friend. I showed her the agreement, the messages, the email. She told me that legally I was protected. Divorce finalized. No shared custody. No pending obligations. Then she paused and asked me one question. Was there anything that could reopen negotiation? I did not answer immediately. She looked at me closely and told me that silence was an answer too. That night, Ethan called again. This time, he sounded nervous. He told me his mother was insisting on flying out. He said she believed there were unresolved matters. I told him not to give her my address. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything I needed to know. I ended the call and turned off my phone. For the first time since leaving, I felt real fear. Not panic, but a sharp awareness that the space I had created was shrinking. I placed my hand on my stomach and felt a small movement. It grounded me. The next morning, my lawyer called. She told me someone had requested information about my residency status. Not officially, not legally, but through informal channels. People who expected cooperation. They were no longer asking. They were preparing. And I understood then that the agreement I signed had bought me time, not freedom. I stopped pretending that silence would protect me. The pattern was clear now. The agreement had ended the marriage, but it had not ended their interest. Something had alerted them, something they could not yet prove, and that uncertainty was making them aggressive. People like Ethan's parents did not tolerate gaps in information. They filled them by force. My lawyer advised me to stay calm and not respond to anything that did not come through official channels. She said the moment I reacted emotionally, they would gain leverage. I followed her advice, even when it became difficult. Each unanswered message felt like inviting a storm, but answering would only guide it closer. Ethan called again late one night. His voice was different this time. Not apologetic, not careful, but strained. He said his mother was convinced I had lied about something important. He said she believed I had left the country too quickly for no reason. I asked him directly what she thought I was hiding. He did not answer. Instead, he said he was worried about me being alone. I told him to stop pretending concern was the issue. I reminded him that when I needed protection, he had stayed silent. He did not argue. He only said that his parents would not let this go easily. That was the closest thing to a warning he had ever given me. The next day, my friend called from home. She told me that people were asking questions about me, not publicly, not officially, but quietly. Questions about my health. Questions about why I had been visiting clinics before leaving. Questions about timelines. She said my name had returned to conversations it had disappeared from. I understood what that meant. They were reconstructing the past, looking for inconsistencies, searching for proof they could weaponize. I reviewed every step I had taken. Every appointment, every message, every document. I had been careful, but I had also been human. Fear does not erase evidence. It only sharpens the consequences. That night, I received confirmation that my mother-in-law had booked a flight, not to visit me officially, but to check on family matters. She did not contact me directly. She never did when she intended to dominate a situation. She preferred arrival over warning. I sat alone, calculating timelines again. Weeks, proof, jurisdiction. I knew that once she arrived, the tone would change completely. There would be no politeness, no restraint. She would not ask what I wanted. She would tell me what would happen. For the first time since leaving, I accepted that confrontation was inevitable. Running had given me distance, but not resolution. Whatever secret they were closing in on, I would soon be forced to defend it openly. I placed my hand on my stomach and made a decision. If they were coming for answers, they would not get control. Whatever happened next, I would not disappear again. The confirmation arrived through my friend before it arrived through them. She called early in the morning and told me that Ethan's mother was no longer guessing. Someone had spoken. A clinic employee, a careless remark, a timeline that no longer aligned. The truth had surfaced in fragments, enough to form a conclusion they could not ignore. They knew I was pregnant. The tone changed immediately. The lawyer emails stopped. The polite language disappeared. In its place came direct intent. My friend told me Ethan's parents were furious, not because I had hidden the pregnancy, but because I had taken control away from them. The child I carried was no longer a private matter. In their eyes, it was an asset that had been moved without permission. Ethan called that evening. He did not pretend anymore. He asked me why I had not told him. I asked him what difference it would have made. He said it would have changed everything. I told him that was exactly why I stayed silent. He went quiet, then said his parents wanted to see me, not to talk, to settle things. I refused. He warned me that refusal would escalate the situation. I told him escalation had already begun. When he said the child was also his, I reminded him that he had signed the agreement willingly. He said agreements could be revisited. I told him lives could not. 2 days later, I was informed that his mother had landed. She did not call. She did not announce herself. She allowed the pressure to build first. That was her method. Let fear do the work before she entered the room. I met with my lawyer again. She told me the law was on my side, but law did not prevent harassment, intimidation, or prolonged conflict. She asked me if I was prepared for a fight that could last years. I told her I did not have a choice. She nodded, as if she already knew the answer. That night, I barely slept. Not because I doubted my decision, but because I understood the scale of what was coming. Ethan's family had resources, influence, patience. They were used to winning through exhaustion. I was one woman in a foreign country, pregnant, carrying a child they believed belonged to them. In the early hours of the morning, my phone lit up with a single message from an unknown number. It was short and precise. "We need to talk, for the sake of the child." I did not reply. I knew then that the next encounter would not be about negotiation. It would be about control. And once that door opened, there would be no closing it quietly again. I agreed to meet her because refusing would only give her more reason to force her way in. We chose a neutral place, quiet and public enough to prevent a scene. She arrived early, already seated, her posture composed, her expression settled into the calm she used before delivering decisions. She did not ask how I was. Her eyes went straight to my stomach. The confirmation she needed was already there. She said my name once, slowly, as if testing ownership. Then she told me I had made a serious mistake. She said hiding the pregnancy had damaged trust. She said trust was essential if we were going to move forward properly. I asked her what moving forward meant. She did not hesitate. It meant planning the child's future with the family that could provide stability, legacy, and protection. I told her I was that family. Her expression hardened. She said a single mother abroad was not stability. She said a child without his father's name would suffer. She said courts would agree. Every sentence was measured, rehearsed, and designed to corner me into doubt. I asked her if this concern had existed when she sent me out of the country. She ignored the question. Instead, she explained that circumstances had changed. That word again, changed, as if my value shifted only because of what I carried. She told me Ethan was willing to cooperate, that he wanted to be involved, that this could be resolved quietly if I was reasonable. I asked her to define reasonable. She said shared custody at first, followed by reassessment once the child was older. She did not say where the child would eventually live. She did not need to. I told her no. For the first time, her composure cracked. She said I was being emotional. She said pregnancy clouds judgment. She said I was confusing possession with love. I reminded her that she had already sold my marriage once. I would not allow her to negotiate my child the same way. She leaned forward and lowered her voice. She told me this would not end with one conversation. She told me that influence travels faster than law. She told me that resistance would cost me peace, money, and time I should be spending preparing for motherhood. I stood up before she could continue. I told her she could speak to my lawyer from now on. I told her I would not meet her again without representation. She looked up at me, studying me as if seeing someone new. As I walked away, my phone vibrated. A message from Ethan, one sentence. "Please don't turn this into a war." I did not respond, because it already was one. After that meeting, the pressure stopped pretending to be subtle. Letters arrived from lawyers I had never contacted, each one carefully worded, each one suggesting cooperation while quietly outlining consequences. They spoke of mediation, of shared responsibility, of what was best for the child. None of them mentioned what was best for me. I did not reply. Every response went through my lawyer, and every response said the same thing. No. Ethan called repeatedly. Sometimes he sounded calm, sometimes frustrated, sometimes desperate. He said his parents were only trying to help. He said they were worried about the baby growing up without structure. I asked him where that concern had been when I was still his wife. He had no answer. Silence had always been his refuge. One evening, he finally said what I had been waiting to hear. He said his parents were preparing to take legal action after the birth. He said they would demand a paternity test and push for custody arrangements immediately. He told me this as if it were a warning meant to protect me. I heard it for what it was. Pressure delivered through him because they still believed he could soften me. I told him I was already prepared. That answer unsettled him. He asked what I meant. I told him I had legal representation, documentation, and witnesses. I told him I was not isolated anymore. For the first time, he sounded unsure. He asked if I planned to keep the child from him. I told him I planned to keep the child safe. If he wanted to be a father, he would have to prove he could stand on his own, not hide behind his parents. The next move came faster than I expected. A woman appeared near my building more than once, always watching, never speaking. My lawyer confirmed what I already knew. They were documenting my behavior, my routine, my stability. They were building a case not against me as a person, but against me as a mother. I did not change my routine. I did not react. I did not give them material. Fear was exactly what they wanted. I refused to give it to them. Then came the message that made everything clear. Ethan's mother sent it herself, abandoning intermediaries. She said that if I continued to resist, they would ensure the child would never grow up knowing hardship. She said money could erase many inconveniences. She did not say my name. I read it once and deleted it. That was the moment I stopped thinking of this as something I could manage quietly. They were no longer asking me to cooperate. They were testing how far they could push before I broke. I placed my hand on my stomach and felt movement. It was small but unmistakable. That movement settled something in me. Whatever happened next, I would not retreat again. If they wanted control, they would have to take it openly. And I would make sure the cost was higher than they expected. I stopped waiting for their next move and focused on preparing for it. My lawyer advised me to document everything. Calls, messages, sightings, indirect contact. Not because any single incident proved wrongdoing, but because patterns did. People like Ethan's family relied on exhaustion and confusion. They expected me to doubt myself before they ever reached a courtroom. Ethan tried a different approach. He called one afternoon and spoke carefully, as if every word had been approved in advance. He said he wanted to visit after the baby was born. Not to take the child away, he claimed, but to be present. I asked him if his parents supported that idea. He hesitated, then said they would in time. That answer told me he was still negotiating on their behalf. I asked him a direct question. If your parents demand custody, will you oppose them? He did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. He said he did not want conflict. I told him conflict was inevitable when people refused to choose a side. He ended the call shortly after. Days later, my lawyer informed me that a formal notice had been drafted. Not sent yet, but ready. It outlined intentions to establish paternity and request involvement in the child's upbringing. It avoided the word custody, but the meaning was clear. They were waiting for the birth, waiting for vulnerability. The realization was unsettling. They did not need me now. They needed the child. Once the child existed legally, publicly, undeniably, their leverage would multiply. Until then, I was tolerated. After that, I would be challenged. I adjusted my plans. I chose a hospital carefully. I restricted access to my medical information. I made sure my records were locked and my emergency contacts were limited. Every precaution felt excessive until I reminded myself who I was dealing with. One evening, my friend called to warn me that Ethan's mother had been asking about birth timelines. Not directly, but through people who assumed cooperation. I thanked her and ended the call. The walls were closing in, but slowly enough that panic would be a mistake. Then Ethan showed up without warning. I did not open the door at first. I watched through the window as he stood there, hands in his pockets, looking uncertain. When I finally let him in, he did not sit down. He looked at me and said he wanted to see the baby when it was born. I told him that would depend on his choices between now and then. He asked what choices. I told him to stand up to his parents. He said that was not easy. I told him neither was what they were asking of me. When he left, he did not say goodbye. I knew then that whatever restraint remained was fading. The waiting phase was almost over. And once it ended, there would be no turning back for any of us. The official notice arrived 2 weeks later. It was delivered through my lawyer, formal and restrained, but unmistakable in intent. They were requesting confirmation of paternity immediately after birth and proposing a temporary arrangement for involvement that would later be reassessed. The language was polite. The implication was not. This was the opening move. My lawyer told me not to respond yet. She said patience would work against them this time. They expected panic, resistance, something they could frame as instability. I gave them nothing. I continued my routine. Clinic visits, work, home, every step deliberate. Ethan called again after the notice was delivered. This time, he sounded defensive. He said his parents were only trying to secure rights, not take anything away. I asked him if he had read the notice carefully. He admitted he had not. I told him to read it and call me back when he understood what his parents were asking. He did not call back. A few days later, my friend warned me that Ethan's mother was telling people I was being unreasonable, that I was cutting the father out, that I was being influenced by outsiders. The narrative was being shaped quietly, the way powerful families preferred. I did not correct it. Public opinion had never protected me before. What unsettled me most was the shift in their tone. There was no anger now, no threats, only confidence. They believed time was on their side. Once the child was born, they would move quickly, before I recovered, before I could adapt. They had done this before in other contexts. They knew how to exploit moments of weakness. I met with my lawyer again and made decisions I had hoped to avoid. We prepared documents in advance. Guardianship clauses, medical authority confirmations, travel restrictions, nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, just structure. The kind they valued so highly when it benefited them. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan called late one night, his voice unsteady. He told me his parents had asked him to sign a separate document, one that would authorize them to act on his behalf regarding the child if needed. He asked me what I thought. I told him that was his choice, but once signed, it would tell me everything I needed to know. He did not answer. The next day, I learned through my friend that he had signed it. That information settled any remaining uncertainty. Whatever conflict lay ahead would not include him as an ally. He had chosen the safety of obedience over responsibility. I adjusted my expectations accordingly. That night, I felt the baby move strongly, insistently. I placed my hand on my stomach and stayed still until the movement passed. The timing felt symbolic. Decisions had been made on all sides. The next phase would not be quiet. It would be decisive. The day Ethan signed that document, the rules changed. Until then, everything had existed in a gray space of implication and pressure. After that, it became a matter of execution. His parents no longer needed him to persuade me. They needed him only as proof of consent. My lawyer confirmed what I already suspected. With that authorization, they could act faster, speak louder, and push harder once the child was born. Not illegally, but aggressively. Enough to overwhelm someone unprepared. They were counting on fatigue, fear, and isolation to do the work. I informed my lawyer that there would be no compromises, no informal visits, no unsupervised access, no private agreements. Everything would be documented. She warned me that this would escalate the conflict. I told her escalation was already unavoidable. That same week, Ethan's mother requested another meeting. This time, she did not hide her intent behind concern. She said the family wanted clarity before the birth. She said unresolved matters created unnecessary risk. I agreed to meet once more, but only with legal representation present. When she arrived, she did not waste time. She stated plainly that the family intended to be involved from the moment the child was born. She spoke as if this was a decision already finalized. I listened, then told her that any involvement would happen on my terms and within the law. She smiled briefly, the way people do when they believe resistance is temporary. She warned me that childbirth was unpredictable, that emergencies required quick decisions, that I might not always be in a position to act alone. The implication was clear. She was reminding me of vulnerability. I reminded her that medical authority had already been assigned. Her smile faded. She then said something that made everything fall into place. She said that if I continued to resist, the child would grow up surrounded by conflict, that this would be my responsibility. I told her conflict had begun long before my pregnancy, and I would not carry guilt that belonged to others. The meeting ended without resolution. That was expected. What was not expected was the call I received that night from a private number. A calm voice introduced itself as someone acting in the family's interests. He spoke about logistics, about future planning, about minimizing disruption. He did not threaten me. He did not need to. I ended the call and blocked the number. Then I sat still for a long time, understanding that this was no longer a personal dispute. It was a calculated effort to regain control over something they believed should never have slipped away. The next move would not be conversation. It would be action. The action came quietly, which made it more dangerous. There were no warnings, no dramatic confrontations. Instead, small things began to shift around me. My lawyer informed me that inquiries had been made about my work schedule. Someone had requested confirmation of my residency status. None of it was official enough to challenge directly, but all of it pointed in the same direction. They were mapping my life. Ethan stopped calling. That silence was deliberate. When people like his parents moved into strategy, emotional channels were cut off. Communication became procedural, efficient, cold. I understood then that whatever doubt he had carried before was no longer relevant. He had stepped aside and allowed them to take over completely. I received notice that a representative from the family intended to be present at the hospital during the birth. Not invited. Intended. My lawyer responded immediately, stating that no one other than myself and approved medical staff would be allowed access. The reply came back within hours, challenging the restriction and citing paternal concern. The timing confirmed everything. They were preparing to move the moment I was weakest. That night I could not sleep. Not from fear, but from clarity. I understood that once labor began, every minute would matter. Decisions would be made quickly, records would be referenced, and pressure would be applied under the guise of urgency. I reviewed every document again, every clause, every authority assignment. Everything was in place, but preparation did not erase risk. The following morning, my friend called to tell me that Ethan's mother had returned home. That did not reassure me. It confirmed that she had finished her groundwork. She no longer needed proximity. The pieces were set. 2 days later, I received a formal notice requesting mediation immediately after the birth. Not weeks later. Immediately. They were planning to surround the moment with paperwork and expectation. My lawyer advised me to delay everything until I was medically cleared. She said law respected recovery time, even if people did not. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan called. His voice was different, not controlled, not defensive. He sounded shaken. He told me his parents had shown him plans he had not seen before. Timelines, contingencies. He said he did not realize how far they intended to go. I asked him if that changed anything. He did not answer directly. He said he just wanted to make sure the baby would be okay. I told him the baby would be okay if everyone respected boundaries. I told him this was his last chance to choose how he would be involved. Silence followed. When he spoke again, he said he needed time. I told him time was something he no longer had. When the call ended, I knew something had shifted. Not in his parents' strategy, but in him. Whether that shift would matter remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. The moment of birth would not just bring a child into the world. It would trigger a confrontation no one could delay anymore. Labor began earlier than expected. There was no dramatic warning, only a sudden certainty that the waiting was over. I informed my lawyer first, then the hospital. I did not inform Ethan. That decision was deliberate. The moment this process became public to his family, control would shift away from me. Within hours, pressure followed. My lawyer received calls asking for confirmation, for updates, for access. Each request was framed as concern, each one was denied. The hospital was instructed clearly. No visitors without my approval, no information released, everything documented. Ethan called while I was in active labor. I did not answer. He sent messages asking if everything was all right. I did not respond. Silence was not cruelty, it was protection. What I did not expect was how quickly they adapted. A representative arrived at the hospital claiming to act on Ethan's behalf. The staff contacted my lawyer immediately. The representative was removed. No confrontation, no scene, just denial. That efficiency told me how prepared they were. They had assumed access would be automatic. Hours later, my son was born. The moment was brief and overwhelming, but it was also grounding. He was real, he was here. Whatever battle waited outside, that room no longer mattered the same way. I signed the necessary documents while exhausted but clear-headed. My name alone, my authority alone. Within 12 hours, the legal response arrived. A request for emergency mediation citing paternal rights and family concern. My lawyer rejected it on medical grounds. The response came back immediately, pushing again. They were trying to force speed, believing recovery would weaken my resolve. Ethan sent a message that night, one line. "Please let me see him." I did not reply, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I needed to know who would speak next. Him or his parents. The answer came the following morning. A formal notice stating intent to establish paternity and seek structured involvement. It was signed not by Ethan, but by the family's legal counsel. That told me everything. I authorized my lawyer to respond fully, not defensively, not emotionally, directly. Custody would remain with me. Any involvement would be supervised and scheduled. No exceptions, no informal access, no negotiation without court oversight. The reply from their side was immediate. They objected, they warned, they suggested reconsideration. None of it mattered. For the first time since this began, the pace slowed. Not because they gave up, but because they realized something had changed. The child existed now, legally, clearly, and he was not where they expected him to be. I held my son and understood that whatever came next would not be decided in private rooms anymore. It would happen in the open, where money alone could not rewrite reality. Ethan arrived 2 days later. He did not announce himself. He did not bring lawyers or representatives. He came alone, standing outside the hospital room like someone unsure of his right to enter. When I allowed him in, he looked at the baby first, then at me, as if searching for permission in my face. He said the baby's name softly, as if testing whether it belonged to him. I did not respond. I watched him carefully, because this moment mattered more than any conversation we had ever had. This was where people either took responsibility or revealed their limits. He told me his parents were furious. He told me they believed I had acted unfairly, that I had cut them out deliberately. I asked him whether he agreed. He avoided the question. Instead, he said he wanted to be involved without fighting. I told him involvement required independence. If every decision passed through his parents, then he was not involved. He was represented. He said he was trying to find a balance. I told him balance was what had destroyed our marriage. Silence followed. He reached out toward the baby, then stopped, his hand hovering in the air. He asked if he could hold him. I said no, not yet. That refusal changed the tone, not dramatically but noticeably. His jaw tightened. He asked what he needed to do. I told him to withdraw the authorization he had signed. I told him to tell his parents that custody decisions were not theirs to make. I told him to speak for himself. He said it was not that simple. I told him nothing about this had ever been simple, but he had still made choices. He said his parents would never accept being cut out. I told him then they would never have control. He stood there for a long time without speaking. When he finally did, he said he needed time to think. I told him time was a luxury he had already spent. If he left that room without choosing, I would treat him like everyone else. Through legal channels only. He looked at the baby again, then at me. For a moment, I thought he might argue. Instead, he said he understood. He left without touching his son. That evening, my lawyer called. She said Ethan had contacted her directly, asking questions without his parents present. That detail mattered. It meant something inside him was shifting. Whether it would hold under pressure was another question. The next day, his parents escalated. They accused me of alienation. They demanded immediate visitation. They questioned my stability. My lawyer responded calmly, denying every claim and requesting proof. There was none. The silence that followed was heavy, strategic. They were recalculating. I knew then that the conflict had reached its narrowest point. Either Ethan would step out of their shadow, or they would push this into a long public battle. And whichever path he chose would decide how much damage followed. The withdrawal came quietly, which made it dangerous. For several days, there were no letters, no calls, no indirect pressure. My lawyer warned me not to relax. Families like Ethan's did not pause without purpose. Silence was not surrender, it was preparation. Ethan called on the fourth day. His voice was steady, but strained. He told me he had spoken to his parents and that the conversation had not gone well. He said they believed I was manipulating him through the child. I asked him what he believed. He did not answer immediately. When he did, he said he believed things had gone too far. He told me he had withdrawn the authorization he signed. Not publicly, not dramatically. He had sent a formal notice stating that no one was allowed to act on his behalf regarding the child without his written consent. That decision angered his parents. He did not soften that fact. He said they felt betrayed. I told him that was the first independent choice he had made since this began. I also told him it did not erase the damage already done. He said he understood. He asked if that changed anything. I told him it changed the direction, not the conditions. The response from his parents was immediate. They accused him of being manipulated. They questioned his judgment. They threatened to proceed without him. My lawyer informed me that they were now considering filing directly, arguing exceptional circumstances. It was a weak position legally, but strong emotionally. They were trying to create urgency where none existed. I prepared for court. Documents were organized, medical records secured, witness statements drafted. Everything was precise. I did not add emotion where evidence was required. The strategy was simple. Let them show their aggression. Let me show stability. Ethan asked to visit again. I agreed under supervision. This time, I allowed him to hold the baby. He was careful, almost afraid. He did not look at his phone. He did not speak about his parents. He asked practical questions. Feeding, sleeping, schedules. It was the first time he acted like a father instead of an intermediary. When he left, he told me his parents were furious with him. He said they believed I had turned him against them. I told him he had turned himself toward responsibility. That difference mattered. That night, my lawyer called with an update. The family had delayed filing, not withdrawn, delayed. They were reassessing their position now that Ethan was no longer fully aligned with them. That hesitation was a crack. I held my son and understood that the balance had shifted slightly. Not in my favor entirely, but enough to change the shape of the fight. They could still cause damage, but they could no longer claim unity. For the first time since this began, I felt something close to leverage. The filing came anyway. Not aggressive, not dramatic, but calculated. Ethan's parents submitted a request for court-supervised visitation, framed carefully to avoid accusations while implying concern about access. It was the compromise they believed would force cooperation. They did not ask for custody, they asked for presence. That was strategic. My lawyer read the document twice and then smiled. She told me this was weaker than what they had prepared earlier. It meant Ethan's withdrawal had limited their reach. They could no longer claim urgency or obstruction. They had to pretend patience. Ethan called after the filing. He sounded frustrated, not defensive. He told me his parents had acted without informing him. He said he felt sidelined. I told him that was how I had felt for months. He did not argue. Instead, he asked how I planned to respond. I told him the truth. I would agree to supervised visitation, on my terms, at a neutral location, with clear boundaries. I would not deny his parents access entirely, but I would not allow them authority. He was silent for a moment, then said that was fair. That word had not existed in his family's vocabulary for a long time. The hearing date was set quickly, not because of urgency, but because the court wanted clarity. That worked in my favor. There would be no drawn-out uncertainty, no prolonged pressure before structure was imposed. At the hearing, their lawyer spoke calmly about family bonds and continuity. My lawyer responded with documentation, timelines, and evidence of prior coercion. No raised voices, no emotion, just contrast, stability versus control. When the judge asked about Ethan's position, he spoke for himself, not for his parents. He said he wanted involvement, but not at the cost of conflict. He said he supported supervised visitation under clear terms. His parents' expressions changed, not anger, calculation breaking down. The decision came swiftly. Supervised visitation approved, limited frequency, clear boundaries, no removal, no travel, no authority beyond presence. Temporary, subject to review. It was not a victory, it was containment. Outside the courtroom, Ethan's mother did not approach me. She spoke to her lawyer instead. That mattered. It meant she understood the limits now existed beyond her control. Ethan walked with me part of the way. He said he was sorry again. I told him apologies did not matter anymore. Choices did, he nodded. That night, alone with my son, I understood something clearly. They had lost the ability to take. Now, they could only ask. And asking was not their strength. The visits began 2 weeks later. Supervised, scheduled, documented. Ethan's parents arrived on time, dressed formally, polite to the staff, restrained in their words. They did not argue. They did not challenge the rules. That restraint was intentional. They were observing, not surrendering. I stayed present during every visit, not interfering, not provoking, simply watching. Ethan's mother spoke softly to the baby, choosing words carefully, as if each sentence might later be quoted. His father remained quiet, observing me more than the child. They were collecting impressions, searching for weaknesses that did not exist. After the third visit, their lawyer requested an adjustment. More time, fewer restrictions. My lawyer declined. The reasons were clear. Nothing had changed. Stability did not require expansion. Pressure followed the refusal. Not openly, but through suggestion, through questions, through concern framed as care. Ethan remained consistent. He attended when he could, respected the schedule, and avoided involving his parents in decisions. That separation irritated them more than any argument would have. Control slipped when intermediaries became unnecessary. Then the shift happened. Ethan's mother requested a private conversation. Through lawyers, structured, supervised, I agreed because refusal would prolong the cycle. When we spoke, she did not threaten me. She did not bargain. She stated that the family was willing to step back if I agreed to maintain visitation quietly without further legal conflict. I asked her what stepping back meant. She said no more filings, no media, no interference. I asked what she wanted in return. She said stability, regular access, no escalation. I told her that was already happening, that the only reason conflict existed was because they refused to accept limits. I told her those limits were not temporary, they were permanent. She studied me for a long moment and said something that confirmed everything. She said she had underestimated me, not emotionally, strategically. That was the first honest sentence she had spoken to me. The following week, the lawyer withdrew the pending review request. No explanation, just withdrawal. The pressure eased immediately. Calls stopped. Emails slowed. The tone shifted from pursuit to maintenance. Ethan told me his parents were angry with him, but tired. They had expected time and influence to wear me down. Instead, time had worked against them. I did not celebrate, I waited. Months passed without escalation. The routine held. The child grew. The visits continued without expansion. Control remained where it belonged. One evening, Ethan asked if things could ever be normal. I told him this was normal now. Boundaries were not punishment, they were structure. For the first time, he did not argue. I understood then that the conflict was not over because someone won. It was over because they could no longer force a different outcome. 6 months passed before the silence truly settled. There were no more filings, no new demands, no surprise visits. Everything that needed to be defined had been, and everything that needed to be fought had already been decided. The balance had shifted permanently. Ethan's parents still visited, but under quiet supervision, their tones stripped of authority. They spoke politely, smiled when expected, and left exactly on schedule. Control had been replaced by compliance. Ethan visited alone now. He did not bring up the past. He did not argue about boundaries. He asked about the child, listened, and left. He was learning the difference between involvement and intrusion. That was his redemption, silent and incomplete, but real. One evening, after a visit, he lingered by the door. He said his parents were considering moving abroad. I asked if that meant the visits would stop. He said they would continue, but less often. I told him that was fine. He asked if I hated them. I said hate required energy I no longer had. He nodded once and left. After that, contact became minimal. My lawyer checked occasionally, but even she admitted the situation had stabilized. There were no active disputes, no pending reviews, no hidden threats. The family had accepted what they could not reverse. That acceptance was not peace, but it was enough. The child grew quickly, unaware of the history that surrounded his existence. His life began cleanly, without the weight of the past pressing on him. I made sure of that. Every decision, every defense, every silence had led to this quiet normalcy. It was not triumph, it was survival, precise and measured. One afternoon, I received a letter. Not from lawyers, not from Ethan's parents, but from Ethan himself. It was handwritten, simple. He thanked me for protecting their son when he hadn't. He said he understood now what I had been trying to preserve. He ended with a line that stayed with me longer than I expected. "You were right, freedom doesn't come from leaving. It comes from refusing to return." I folded the letter and put it away. The story that began with betrayal and silence ended not with revenge or reconciliation, but with balance. The people who once held power now stayed outside the walls they built. The man who once disappeared had finally understood loss, and the woman who once had nothing left had everything that mattered, legally, quietly, and completely hers. The war ended without noise. Only boundaries remained, and in those boundaries finally was peace. You have reached the end of the text.